All right, welcome back to the Ottawa studios of Inside My Canoe Head. I am your host, Dr. D. We start season 9, the weeks of practical preparedness. Today, we kick off week number 1, talking about your most likely event in your trifecta of preparedness plans. That's a power loss, so grab yourself your favorite beverage. Let's get at it. All right, I hope everybody's enjoying the 2024 year. I hope all of your New Year's resolutions made it past Quitting Friday. Apparently last Friday is the number 1 quitting day for New Year's resolutions. That's why it come up with this name. I don't know, when you put holidays like that and you call it Quitting Friday, aren't you kind of influencing people saying, hey, most people don't make it past this day, so just shut her down, big fella. You're just going to be like everybody else. Or did you do something different? You're still on the carnivore diet. You're still doing your 75 hard. You've still fired all the toxic people in your life. Whatever your New Year's resolution is, or whether you're like me and you don't make them, it just doesn't matter as long as you are rocking an incredible life. And that's what we're going to do here for the next 10 weeks on Inside My Canoe Head. We have got practical preparedness. As promised in the season opener, we have 10 weeks of specifically dedicated practical activities, things we're going to talk about with very doable and actionable items. We've talked at length, season 6, 7, 8, about the theoretical underpinnings and the rationale behind preparedness, why it exists, why people do what they do, and so therefore now we're going to talk about what you actually specifically need to do. And so we're going to start off with the first 3 weeks are all about your trifecta of preparedness plans. Most likely, most dangerous, and your income loss plan. Then we're going to get into week 4, 5, and 6, talking about your exposure to critical infrastructure, teaching you how to build a personal risk profile, and then talking about practical preparedness on the move. And we're going to close out the last 4 weeks getting into March with equipment, all about you learning how to fight and personal responsibility. So that's the next 10 weeks of Inside My Canoe Head. Each week has a theme. Like I said, this week we're talking about your most likely trifecta of preparedness plans. There's going to be a couple of podcast episodes about it today and Thursday, Friday. Then we're going to talk about having about 28 to 30 different short reels that are going to be up across social media to talk about it. We're going to write a blog this week, and we're going to send out a newsletter all about it. So that is what the information we're going to produce. Repeat that 9 more times for the next 10 weeks of practical preparedness. This is about tips from us for you. Everything we do here at Inside My Canoe Head is based upon the latest research. It's not a pocket talk. It's not about a bunch of crap. Stock up on these 10 things before they're not available to you. The grid collapse, the permanent grid collapse is not coming. Society is not going to come apart. We don't have the edge of World War III about to happen. Yes, the 2020s are going to be an incredibly disruptive decade. If you hadn't already realized, the first 4 years were pretty epic. 2020, 2021, 2, and 3. Those 4 years were pretty epic. We're not even halfway through, and we've had some pretty fundamental shifts in North American and global society. So with that, this is your one place where you're going to get the evidence base, the stuff that actually works. So people always ask me, and I get these questions regularly. You say evidence-based, what's wrong with everybody else's evidence? Because the difference is other people are telling you what they believe in their opinions, People will come across and say, I've been a police officer for 20 years. This is what you need to do for security, right? And you're going to say, hey, that's a rational idea to follow. Evidence looks at, over the last 20 years, what are the specific activities that homeowners did that can be directly related to a reduction in property crimes? Not what the police officer thinks you should do. Nothing wrong with that. They've been around 20 years. But what is the hard, irrefutable truth, facts of evidence tell us? If you do the following things, the last 20 years of evidence has shown that makes your house 72.5% less likely to be broken into. That's evidence. None of us can predict the future, right? Everybody wants to, especially in the U.S. 2024 election, everybody wants to tell us what's going to happen, but none of us can predict the future. But what evidence does is it looks at what happened in the past. If you did A in the past, B was the outcome. 72.5% of the time, based upon you doing A. That's evidence. So no, I can't tell you what happens in the future, but I can tell you if you do what we know leads to greater preparedness in the past based upon experience and evidence, then you're more likely to be the future. So I don't know the future, you don't know, but if the past is any indicator, then I can help you. And that's evidence-based. So I look at groups of people and bodies of people that have all gone through the same experience, right? So you take a body politic, a body population, a city. Say you have a city like Moore, Oklahoma, that goes through a tornado. Everybody gets hit by the tornado, irrespective of your socioeconomic status. The poor, the rich, the wealthy, and everybody in between. The employed, the unemployed, your gender, your demographics, your race, culture, creed. None of that matters when a tornado rips through the town. So when everybody's hit by the very same event, you look at the different groups, and then you look at them and you see, based upon evidence, who recovered better and faster and to a better level, right? So you look at the recovery levels of all the different groups, and then you identify, hey, listen, we've got a group over here that was devastated by the tornado, but they had a far better outcome than everybody else, right? So you identify that group. Now what we do as researchers is we look at that group and we say, okay, what did they do differently? Because I got smoked by the tornado like everybody else. What did they do differently? What was different about them? And those are the variables that tell you why they did better. And then I can turn around and say to people like you and put it on a podcast and say, hey, we know in the past through evidence, if you do these things, you're more than likely to have a better outcome in a tornado. That's evidence-based. That doesn't inform anything that you see mostly on YouTube when somebody says, you know, I've been in the Army. Like I was in the Army 28 years. That doesn't make me a better prepper. Okay. I'll tell you right off the bat. Army guys don't make better preppers. Army guys are disciplined, which means if they decide to do something, they're more than likely to stick with it, right? That's the discipline. But being in the Army, being an escape and evasion instructor, a survival instructor, or being a police officer, that doesn't make you a better prepper. And that doesn't give me a better platform and better evidence, right? It doesn't. Evidence does that. So enough harping on that. Today we're going to talk about power outages, right? So power is a little bit of background first, and then we'll get into 5 practical tips that you can do today. But first, in today's modern, connected, technologically enabled society, power or utilities is the number one main piece of critical infrastructure, right? It supports all the other, the water, the transportation, the finance, the government, the health sector, the food sector. All of that relies on energy to make it work. If you look around your modern technologically enabled society, the one that gives you a freaking incredible amount of opportunity, just think about all of the things that you got up this morning and assume would work. You got up this morning and assume your cell phone would still work because it was plugged in last night to charge the battery. You assume when you flicked the switch on your light that the light would come on. You assumed when you stuck your coffee or your cold drink into the microwave and you started, it would work. When you plugged in the kettle and pulled the knob down to make your morning cup of tea, you assumed it would work, right? You assumed everything in your refrigerator was safe last night because, of course, the power was on. We make this assumption every day, right? But because power is the most important and critical piece of critical infrastructure, it has significant cascading effects. And that's why we need to address it, number one. Now, it's the most likely because when you look at the frequency of disruptions. So I talk about disruptions a lot here on Inside My Canoe Head and in our parent company, Preparedness Labs Incorporated. Disruptions are things that cause changes in your normal behavior, right? So an exogenous shock, which is a phrase I use all the time, exogenous just means exterior to you, right? You didn't cause it. So things that happen are disrupt the way you intend to run today. So if the power was out today, it's going to disrupt and change the way you execute your planned daily tasks. That's a disruption. You probably personally had nothing to do with the loss of power, but based upon a survey of North American survey of Canadian U.S. households, the most likely event to occur is a loss of power. That's just statistically proven, right? You may magically have never had it happen to you, but you would be a statistical outlier. So compared to every other exogenous shock that could happen to you, power loss is the most likely, right? Now, if we look at the history again in North America, I only have the data for North America, but I think this is reasonably translatable to all of your modern developed or developing nations, is that the average power outage is far less than 3 days. It's actually measured in hours. But the most likely event is that it'll be restored within 3 days, right? When we're looking at the percentage of time that the power is out and the average lost time, you're well into the 90th percentile that it's back restored within 3 days. But 94% of all power losses in North America due to a natural event hazard being realized, so some type of disaster, are restored within 14 days. So that's based upon a study that we did here at here at Preparedness Labs Incorporated. It'll be published later this year in our journal, Preparedness in Canada. If you're looking for a journal about preparedness, if you're into the written technical word with a bunch of opinion pieces, go to our website at preparednesslabs.ca. We have that for you. But so you're looking at a 94% likelihood that your power is going to be restored within 14 days. That's evidence. Again, back to what I said before, by evidence. So based upon that evidence, we say if you plan between 3 and 14 days for a power loss, to be able to navigate that power loss, that gives you a statistically based profile. Now, between 3 and 14 days, you're probably going to ask yourself, so how do I plan? How do I figure out what's most likely? So for you, each individual person has a different risk tolerance, right? You as an individual might be somebody who's very, very comfortable with higher degrees of risk and higher degrees of uncertainty. So if you think, first of all, it's about the principle, like I said, of uncertainty. How comfortable are you without knowing everything? How comfortable are you entering a situation where you're not aware of the exact and specific outcome beforehand? How comfortable are you with that? What is your capacity to adjust? So from a personal ability, this has nothing to do with your physical possessions, where you live or whatever, but from a personal level, when you look at that incredible individual in the mirror, what is your capacity to deal with uncertainty and when things go sideways? Like we laugh about it here at Inside My Canoe Head. I talk about the world, the shizzy hitting the fizzy and the world going pear-shaped all the time as a joke, but when you talk, really it does. So periodically, what's your capacity to deal with that? How do you feel about your own personal capacity to do with that? Now, your attitude. Your attitude is how you choose to respond when uncomfortable things happen, right? When the power goes out, how do you choose to respond? Are you an over-emotional reactor? Do you have strong emotional control? Do you really open a can of shutdown pretty quick and just give up and turtle in the corner? Or do you have an attitude, well, this sucks. Yeah, absolutely, I get it. What am I going to do now to deal with it? Because I still got a bunch of crap to do, right? That's attitude. And the last part is summing all of that up into something we refer to as self-confidence, right? That is your own personal general assessment of yourself. It has nothing to do with what other people think about you, but your own personal self-confidence to be able to navigate exogenous shocks. Right now, when you're sitting in a world where everything is working the way it should, right? The power's on, the utilities are on, your 10 sectors of critical infrastructure are functioning, you're employed, money's going in your bank, the stores are open, your car's working, you're listening to an incredible podcast, everything is working. What's your self-confidence about your ability to deal when things stop going the way they're supposed to? That leads into determining where you go between the 3 to 14 days, right? So your self-confidence, your self-awareness, your risk tolerance informs whether you go from 3 to 14 days for preparedness. It's completely up to you. Some people go, you know what, I'm just going to do 14 to be comfortable with. And some people go, you know what, I can't really consider 14. That is way too much and way too far. So now we're going to turn to your 5 practical tips. The 5 exacting specific things you can do today to be prepared for a coming power outage. And it's not like what you've heard before. Again, this is because it's about evidence. Number 1, every individual has to determine what your minimum power profile is. And this is defined as how much amps or how much watts or volts, and there's an electrical equation online. You can Google it while the power's up to figure that out. But you have to figure out what is your minimum power profile first for life saving. What do you need power for to keep people alive? Now, there is a certain segment of the population that must have climate-controlled meds, right? You have medications and it has to be kept in a climate-controlled environment, a refrigerator or something like that. If you don't take those meds, you die. That's somebody who has life-saving power requirements, right? The next step is, what is your minimum power profile for comfort? And this is when we start talking about fuel to cook food, to make your tea, to make your coffee, and heat. If you heat your residence with anything that requires power, those are comfort level minimum power profiles. And then what is necessary, right? In today's modern technologically enabled society, you need to have your cell phone running. It's just that it's a small computer. It's actually a handheld computer that has a phone application on it, but we all call it a cell phone, right? Fair enough. You need to have your cell phone up and running to be able to continue normal-ish life in a minimum power profile, right? So what does that look like? And the last thing, everything else is just luxury, my friend. So you look at your minimum power profile. For example, here in my household, I used to have, but I no longer have a dependency on life-saving meds. Thank you, I don't need that. I need my cell phone running because I run a corporation and a business that requires the internet to run. Now, as long as the cell tower is working outside, I can let my modem go down. But I can't rely on that. So what I do here at my house, my minimum power profile is to be able to run a small deep freeze and a cell phone, right? Those are the 2 items that I must have because I'm a carnivore, right? So I eat a lot of meat. I have meat frozen in a small deep freeze. I need to keep that frozen at any and all times. That means I don't have to have it plugged in 24/7. I've worked out that I need to be able to plug in my deep freeze if I don't open it or open it very quickly and take something out. I need to have it plugged in 1 hour per day. So I need 4 amps for that. And I need my cell phone to be up and running because I thrive in an emergency. I don't survive, which means when the power's out, I aim to be able to do absolutely everything I did before. So I need to be able to record podcasts, issue podcasts, put out my social media feeds, deal with clients, talk with companies, create deals, sign documents, all this stuff that I do on a daily basis as part of my corporate job, basically, as principal researcher at Preparedness Labs Incorporated. I need to be able to do that. So my cell phone is my key and my laptop is my key. So all of those 3 things, I forgot my laptop, right? So those, I have to run up the amps that I need every day, right? So I have a very specific defined, I know the 3 devices that must be fully powered in my house and to the minimum necessary level. And no, I'm not going to go out into my driveway and start the car. Please don't be one of those people that go out into your driveway and start the car to power your cell phone. Gasoline can't be pumped out of the ground when there's no power, which means you're using a finite resource, the gasoline in your car, to recharge your cell phone. Please don't be that person, okay? So now you have your minimum power profile. You know what it is. You know when the shizzy hits the fizzy and the lights go out, I need to be able to produce X number of amps, X number of watts, however you want to express it. Number 2 practical tip is, what are your options to store or produce your minimum power profile, right? So you can get lithium battery systems. I own a Jackery portable generator. Yeah, they're freaking expensive. I saved up for a while. I gave up other things so that I could save the money. I can't get it regularly. Most people are going to have to save for a couple of months to get one of those. But I have a Jackery portable power system that has sufficiently able to store all the power that I need for 3 days. So based upon the 3 to 14 days, I have the ability within my house, without doing anything else, to run my minimum power profile for 3 days, right? You have the little small handheld power banks that, if just your cell phone is all you're really worried about, then a minimum handheld power bank will restore your cell phone for probably about 3 to 4 times, depending on which cell phone model you have. And you can get larger ones, but they're about $30 on Amazon. And I have one with a built-in solar panel. I think it's more of a gimmick than anything else. But the idea is that I carry around a power bank that can recharge my cell phone 4 times. So if I'm judicious about the use of my cell phone, I can probably get 2 full days, right? 2 to 3 full days of solid use of my cell phone without needing power. That's a way to do it. You've also got a generator, but I mean, if you're going to start getting a generator, you're talking about noise, discipline. You're talking about everybody else in the neighborhood's going to know you have a generator and going to come look for power. There's a whole bunch of things, but you have the option of a generator, and you have the option of building a battery system. You see on some YouTube channels for sailboats, they built this inverter solar generator system. Now, I have a portable solar panel for my Jackery. So when I move past 3 days of power outages, I can put a solar panel outside and power my Jackery, which means now I can carry, technically speaking, if I get reasonable sunlight, I can carry my power indefinitely for my minimum power profile, just the minimum. But my minimum power profile, I can actually generate that indefinitely, right? Reasonably, being that we don't go through like 8 straight days of no sun. I get it. I'm at the mercy of that, but I don't need fuel or anything else. So that's option number 2. Number 1, practical tip number 1, you have your minimum power profile. You know exactly what you need to generate. Tip number 2 is you've now figured out exactly how you are going to generate that for the period of time that you've decided you're comfortable with based upon your personal self-confidence and risk tolerance. Practical tip number 3 is you need to have the fuel and the consumption for that timeline. So if you choose to use a solar, if you choose to use a gas generator, if you choose to use a propane power generator or an isobutane power generator, they all exist. You have to understand, to produce, say, I need 10 amp hours a day, how much exact fuel is that going to be for my generators, whatever your fuel source is, right? So if it's 10 amp hours a day that you need to produce, and you need to figure out what that fuel level is. That's practical tip number 3. You have your minimum power profile, you have your way to store it, and now you've got the fuel to make that happen. So now at just practical tip number 1, 2, and 3, you're at a position where you know the fuel level you need, you able to have that provided for you, and now you're ready for your timeline. Number 4 is temperature control in your residence. And the gray-bearded Green Beret puts this, and I give him credit for it all the time, is it's a thermal regulation of core body temperature. That's your survival mechanism, right? That keeps you alive. Everything else is irrelevant if you can't thermal regulate your core body temperature. And that means you're probably not going to be able to have enough power, because if you electrically heat your house with a baseboard heater, you literally probably can't have a generator big enough to provide that level of power to do that. And if you don't have a wood stove or something else, or its power goes out in the height of the summer with high heat, high humidity, you're going to have to think about, in practical tip number 4, is how are you going to temperature control your residence? So blankets and clothes are your first line of defense. If you live here in Canada, you've seen we've had some polar vortex out west, -40, -50. Everybody generally has appropriate clothing to survive it. Now, you don't want to wear your snowsuit in the house, but you could, and you'd be alive. And that's a positive thing, right? You have blankets to lay in bed at night. You have these type of clothes. But one of the unique things that I want people to think about in practical tip number 4 is passive solar generation. And this has been used for years. So basically what it is when you have sunlight coming in, sunlight is the greatest warmer you have. So what you do is you open all of the curtains and let the sun come in from whatever south-facing residence you have in the winter. And then as soon as the sun goes below the horizon, you shut all of the curtains to keep the heat in. It actually can make a reasonably strong difference, especially if you have stone or bare concrete inside the house that the sun can heat up. That means then the heat will be stored in the concrete or the stone, and then it's released over time in the evening. That's ideal. And in high heat areas, understand the wind pattern. Where's the wind coming from? Open one side, open the other. If you want to get cold airflow and heat air moving out of your house, then you think about what rises. Hot air rises, so you open the windows at the top of the house and you open the windows at the bottom of the house. This will naturally create an internal vortex in your house and get the house moving. These are all things you can explore, but you have to think in practical tip number 4 for a power outage, how you're going to control the temperature in your house the best you can. And this is going to change depending on where you live, obviously. And practical tip number 5 is, because here at Inside My Canoe Head and Preparedness Labs Incorporated, we are all about you thriving, not surviving, which means in times of an emergency, I want you to be able to execute almost and pretty much everything you used to do before. This isn't about you being a professional victim. That's what the public sector resident-facing emergency preparedness communications is all about that you hear online today, is telling you to be a professional victim. We want you to rock your incredible life even when power's out. So this is about what can you not do when the power is out. You need to sit down and jottle it down. What can't I do that I need to do and I want to do when the power is out? And then how do I replace it, right? So if you drive an EV and you home charge the EV or you charge it anywhere, obviously you're not going to be able to recharge your car. Right? So transportation, you've taken your transportation system offline because of your EV choice, which is fine. It's a personal choice. Now you got to think about what are your options, bicycle, etc., public transit, something along that lines. And the other important part that you really got to think about is think about your employer. And a lot of people don't think about this in power loss. To conduct a normal life, you need to be employed. What is your employer going to do if the power is off at work? Do you still get paid? Or are you now taking an income hit because the power's off because you can't attend your residence? What if we go out 14 days with no power and you're not getting paid for 14 days, right? We're talking about this in the 3rd week of practical preparedness, but let's key up this thought process in your head right now. What does that look like for you? Right? So say you work at Starbucks. I love Starbucks. Everybody loves going to Starbucks. Not everybody, but some of us bougie people periodically like to go to Starbucks. But if you're a barista at Starbucks, which is a great job, by the way, and you can't go to work for 14 days, is your Starbucks gonna pay you? If you're a construction worker and the site is shut down for 14 days, are you getting paid? And if you're not getting paid, what's your plan? How are you going to pay those bills? How are you going to continue on normal life and do everything you normally do when your income ceases because of a power loss, right? It's a practical tip nobody really thinks about, but it's generally related, right? So take some time and jot that down and think about that. So let's do a quick review of our 5 practical tips today for your number 1 most likely event, trifecta of preparedness plans, which is a power outage. Your practical tip number 1, understand your minimum power profile, what is life-saving comfort necessary, and what everything else is a luxury. Understand that, express it in volts or watts or whatever you want to do. If you don't know the electrical equation, look it up. Google is a wonderful instruction. So minimum power profile, what do you have to be able to generate or store in power when the power is off? Number 2, now you're going to look at all of your options and decide what is my option to store or produce power when power is not available. Number 3, what fuel and consumption rates do I need to understand and get to make sure that I can meet number 2 to be able to store and produce the power that I need. Number 4 is controlling your temperature and residence, your thermoregulation of core body temperature. Really important in extreme climates to understand how do I going to continue to rock an incredible life when there's no power and I can't turn the heat on or the air conditioner. And the last one is we want you to rock an incredible life. So think about what you lose in terms of practical things that you do when the power is out, and how do you replace those, and so that you can continue rocking an incredible life and doing everything you want without power. And the last one is don't forget your employer, right? The last part of practical tip number 5 is if your employer's not going to pay you for a power outage, what's your plan? Because we go 14 days, my friends. That can be slightly impactful, especially in today's society where people are living pretty close to the edge. So thank you very much for joining us on our first episode of season 9, when we talk about practical preparedness for the next 10 weeks. We've got it focused. Stay with us here at Inside My Canoe Head. Drop us a line at our website, www.preparednesslabs.ca, or over at www.insidemycanoehead.ca, where you see everything about it. And if you love this podcast and you think it's great and you'd love to hear more of it, feel free to drop in to Buy Me a Coffee. And the link is right there on both those websites to say thank you to Dr. D for giving you all of this incredible practical information, and buy me a coffee, because I am fueled by simple black coffee. I'm not a complicated guy. And if not, just leave us a like. Tell us what we're doing. Tell us what you'd like to hear, good, bad, or indifferent. If you think this is a chaotic waste of time and a total junk, please tell us. Tell us why you think that. Tell us what you think we should be telling you that's different from what we are, and then we can start a conversation. I answer every one of them, even the ones that call me names you would not be able to say on a public podcast. I'm happy to respond to those and tell the world what's really going on. So thanks again for joining us. We got all kinds of stuff this week talking about the most likely power outage. Stay tuned across all of our social media, including a long form video that we're going to be kicked out later in the week to talk about the practical applications of a loss of power. So thank you very much. Take care, stay safe, and we'll see you next week.